Hello everyone, my name is Shiva Kunam and I'm here at Foundations for Democratic Office at Hyderabad with Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan. Good afternoon, Dr. JP.
Hello, Shiva. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, fine. Thank you.
Dr. JP, you're a man with diverse interests in governance, policy, sociology, anthropology, economy, and science, and even logic. Some see you as a former legislator, a doctor, a bureaucrat, and most see you as a public intellectual now. How do you see yourself?
It's an interesting question, Shiva. In my mind's eye, I am none of these things. I am that kid who's going to the school in that village. I have the same curiosity, while an experience perhaps widened your worldview. In my mind, I'm still that human being. And in many ways, my response to things around or my passions are linked to that. Because, for instance, I grew up in a village. I went to Telugu medium school, some ramshackle schools, thatched huts and so on and so forth, mostly. Very inadequate infrastructure in the village. Despite that, many of my generation got fantastic education. We never knew that we actually got fantastic education. See, we got what we got and that's it. But when I look back now, it's amazing that hundreds of thousands of us could fulfill our potential. And today, the kids who are going to the same school, despite spending 100 times more money, maybe 1,000 times more money in some cases, despite everybody on paper going to schools, almost none of the kids in that school or those schools have a chance to fulfill their potential. That drives me mad. So in many ways, it is that desire to see the young people's minds being shaped, to see that everybody has an opportunity irrespective of birth. And when you see how tantalizingly possible it is, it's not a dream really, it's immense possibility. We have the resources, we have the technology, we have the demand side, we have the opportunity. Then why doesn't it happen? This is just one symptom of what is wrong with our governance. So everything in my mind's eye is about how to make lives better from the perspective of that young kid in a village.
For his future. It's an interesting response. Are there any less known interests of your hobbies apart from the ones I've listed?
I'm very fond of good television or films, provided they're humorous and they're non-violent, largely. And there's a good story well told. Obviously, I'd be interested in issues related to politics and governance. I'd be interested in issues related to law, or societal change reflected in the story. So I do enjoy good movies. I don't have much of a chance to see them, but whenever there's something good, I do enjoy that. Yes.
Any hobbies outside the office? And
I love to play chess, but my wife and I, we used to play quite a lot, and she's pretty good. We're competitive, and we decided not to play it for the sake of marital harmony. Because, but more than that, I think when you get involved in these kinds of activities, even your sleep sometimes. Now I was getting dreams of chess moves and things like that. So I realized now it's probably not very healthy. I used to play a bit of bridge, not very well, but I learned it later on in life. But not many partners for me to play with, and I don't socialize much, so mostly I gave up. Once in a while I do play. I'm an avid walker. I used to play badminton, but with age, well, by and large it's okay, but the thumps on the badminton courts, for a bit of a stress on the knees, I avoid, but I do play even now. But walking, I love walking in KBR Park or elsewhere as much as possible. So.
Few weeks ago, I went to KBR Park for the first time, hoping I'd run into you, and now we are here, so I'm glad.
Okay.
So, Dr. JP, do you believe there is a God as described by the major religions? Do you believe in the idolatry? And
as a child growing up in a village, my aunt who raised me, my mother's elder sister, stepsister, she was a childhood widow. No, it's normal, without even questioning or thinking. You pray, there's a small little place for puja or something. There are some photos or statues of the gods and goddesses. And then every Ganesh Chauthi, as a child, books and all that you anoint with turmeric or whatever, and then recite the story of Ganesh and so on. That sort of a thing. And I read, I think, the whole of Panduranga Mahatyam, Veera Swami Charitra, without even realizing the significance, we got into it. All these bhakti moment ideas, they probably percolated. But by the age of 13 or 14, I was acquainted with Bertrand Russell. Right. Once I came to college at 13. College means +2 really. I went to Loyola College, a Jesuit institution. So I had a moral science lecturer who was also the rector of the institution, head of the institution, Father Thekkamari. And he used to teach us moral science. I was a 13-year-old kid. I don't think I even wore trousers. I didn't know. I just shorts, that's all. Really, Dehati, an absolute school kid without any exposure to the urban or the sophisticated world. Obviously, a Jesuit father would say that there is a God. Divinity created all of us. And I started challenging it. I remember very aggressively challenged the existence of God because logically I tried to examine it and say, where is God? And if you say that God is the primary reason, then who created God then? If you require a reason, therefore you go to create God, then who created God?
Right.
If you say, no, God created himself, then why not nature create itself? So that rational approach, probably a gift of Bertrand Russell, and subsequently your own experience, thinking and reading, etc., taught me to be agnostic. I am not an atheist. I suppose an agnostic is a cowardly atheist. There may not be that much of a distance. But I truly believe two things. One, some sense of spiritualism. I'm using this word loosely. A sense of the enormity of the universe, the extraordinary things, many of which we can't explain why or how and so on and so forth. To some extent, we're trying to discover how. Inexplicable, really. And if you really think too far ahead, what will happen after billions of years, you lose all perspective. So there is something beyond us. And I keep telling people, it's not literally true, but in a figurative sense, while I don't know if there's a God, I do believe there's a sin. Unfulfilled potential, as I keep saying, is a sin in my book. If a child who is born endowed with genes, have the capacity to rise to a certain level intellectually and otherwise, and if we deny the opportunity because we don't give the tools to hone those skills, education, meaningful education, to me that's a sin. And if you suffer avoidable suffering that could have been prevented by our current technology and our resources, then that's a sin to my mind. So I probably have a Buddha's approach. It doesn't matter whether there's God or not, but there are human beings, there's a society, and there are problems, there are challenges, but they can be addressed by our own agency, collectively and individually, and let's get on with that. And I don't think, while intellectually I know about billions of years of universe and so on and so forth, I try and not dwell on it too much, because I remember my daughter one day asked me when she was 8 years old, she said, because I'm a student of astronomy and other things, I love it. So I keep telling her about all these astronomical distances, the vastness of the universe and the unending
expanding universe.
So she one day asked me innocently a question at the age of 8. She said, Dad, if eventually it's going to be a cold, lifeless universe, what's the point of it all? That question scared me in a child, because I think that's a question which has no answer. Therefore, I told her the only thing that's possible, that's what I tell myself, and that's the only answer I can give. Don't think too much, and that's an intellectual part. Billions of years and all stuff, ignore that. You can only imagine, I can only imagine 30, 40, 50 years or something. Do the best we can and then move on. I don't know what happens. Just ignore. Otherwise, yes, eventually the sun will disappear, and therefore planet Earth will disappear even before that. The sun is supposed to expand before collapsing.
Right.
And Earth will be decimated. And all of us will be inconsequential. But if that is the case, it will become nihilistic. So I don't try to dwell too much on that. But I do believe maybe people like Einstein and others know there's a sense of pantheism, an acknowledgement of humility and the limitation of the human intellect and existence. And therefore there is something bigger than us, whatever it is. You call it God, you call it universe, you call it nature, we don't know. I think that humility is a very important thing. And I think, hopefully, I have some of it.
Do you think any religions apart from Hinduism influenced you, like Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism?
Buddha, yes, very certainly. In fact, I am probably my philosophy of life and understanding of the world around me is shaped in a significant measure by the Buddha. The middle path, and the recognition that there is needless suffering and pain, and you can do a lot to avoid it. That there has to be a synergy between the individual and the community, the sangham and the individual. And beyond that, don't worry too much about God and rituals and all that. So I think in many ways, and then samyak durpatha, the perspective. So in many ways, I think the Buddha certainly influenced me. Many rational thinkers certainly influenced me, but I think Buddha, if you have to attribute any kind of a religious philosophy to me, I would say Buddhism probably approximates closest to it.
Okay, so you don't believe in personal God as in the West. So what does the word God mean to you when someone says God today?
I don't even dwell on God. I don't know if there's a God.
Okay.
So to me, I reject God in that form. But if you have faith, I actually respect you for that. And I think you're a lucky human being. And those who are genuinely spiritual, there are religious people who are not truly spiritual in my book.
Right.
There are some people you can actually see. Pope Francis, for instance, you can actually see a man who transcends the narrowness of a religion.
Right.
He is actually universal in his approach and humanistic and genuinely compassionate. I have great admiration for that. The Paramacharya of Kanchi, for instance, I met him when he was almost 100 years old in Pandharpur, along with my boss, who was senior, who was training me at the time. I went, tagged along with him. So I could see there is, whatever you call it, there is the spiritualism in them. I respect it. And true faith, I respect it. No, it's none of my business to go and argue with you whether you have God or there is a God or not. But in my judgment, true faith and true religion are about reconciling the individual goals with the public good in their own language. Ultimately, it's all, the ratio is this, that when I fulfill my desires or reach my goals, can it be in consonance with the larger society's goals, or should there be always a conflict? So religion in its own way tried to reconcile that. I think that's a very important function. And if a large number of people in the world, in a country like India, maybe 99% of the people need a God on faith in order to find that path, as long as that path is not destructive to the individual or to the community, to the society, I don't think it's our duty to go and prevent that from happening.
So God is compassion in some ways to you.
In many ways, yes. God is compassion. God is about the collective good, without losing the personal freedom.
Right. So, speaking of spiritualism, to me, is there a spirit that could transcend this body? The New Age spiritualism is so much about the spirit transcending the body, or some sort of an energy coming into your body through some ritual. What does spiritualism mean to you?
I have absolutely no such notions. I'm a medical student, medical doctor. I'm a student of science. And I view things based on rational approach, evidence, logic. None of my understanding and learning and experience has taught me that anything like that is happening or happens. But if some people believe that, they're happy with that, good for them.
I wonder if it's a placebo effect, that some people believe there is some sort of energy they are receiving as they go through certain processes and believe in them. So it actually works for them. I don't have a problem with that. But is it not in search of truth that we should go, rather than fooling ourselves that there is some sort of energy that's coming into us?
No, I don't want to use the word fooling ourselves, because, our own Indian philosophy, what does it say? Or even Western philosophy, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
Or Indian. A lot of it is mind. Shankaracharya, Adi Shankara, he said everything is Maya. It's an illusion. So your mind is what is perceiving. Of course, he was very clever when an elephant, I believe, chased the Acharya and his other disciples. He ran for life. And then when somebody asked him, you said everything is a mithya, it's Maya, but why have you run when the elephant chased you? He said, Gajam mithya, palayanam mithya. He cleverly sort of diverted from that. But having said that, the notion is that it is an illusion of the mind. The mind perceives it. So maybe there's enough evidence in neurosciences now that mind perceives all kinds of things in unusual circumstances, when there is too little blood or something else happening. So it's a very improper on our part to question their experience. All I can say is, you believe whatever you believe, but if you allow yourself to be seduced by superstitions which are harmful to you and to others, and or indulging in any kind of a conduct which is detrimental to individual and community good as we understand, then that is dangerous. But as long as that is not the problem, as long as it gives you a solace, a happiness, a contentment, I don't think it's my business to question you.
Right. So do you think the secular societies can gain anything from the good parts of the religion by ignoring the superstitions and all the bad parts? Because the New Age atheists like Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris wants to decimate the religion altogether, citing all the bad parts.
One of the problems with the rationalists and atheists before coming to secularism is there is desperate desire to be combative and to challenge God. They also sometimes tend to become a religion.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary. If you argue for and persuade people about the need for a rational behavior to enhance your own individual goals and the larger community's good, if you reject superstition, if you reject hatred and violence in the name of your chosen God, and therefore you have to oppose the other God, if these conditions are fulfilled, then I don't really care whether you have a God or not. Why should it bother you? Why should you want to argue that there is no God? How silly is it? I mean, how does it matter to you? Tell me, what is it that's affecting your mind, your psyche, or your sense of happiness, or the collective good of humanity by arguing this way or that way? Why are we getting into that? If the bulk of humanity, particularly in societies like ours, they have faith and faith sustains them, why is it important for me to reject that God? Therefore, when you talk of secularism or even rationalism, our only approach should be two. Is there superstition which is hurting, like child marriage, genital mutilation, like widow, the kind of subjugation that widows in the Hindu society, for instance, were kept for centuries, caste system, inequality by birth, moral neutrality to inequality by birth, things of that sort. Or if it breeds hatred, right, that my God and my God alone is superior, and my God is an angry, jealous, and vengeful God, and therefore I cannot tolerate your God. And in your case, ditto, you cannot tolerate my God, and therefore we have to kill each other, beat up each other, hate each other. That's unacceptable. So as long as these two things are taken care of, I really don't care, because it's of no consequence whether you believe in God or don't believe in God.
I think the problem starts when each of these groups have their own agenda in terms of the schooling system and the curriculum and the idea of life and organizing the societies, whether it should be a democracy or a theocracy and all of that. And that's where people push for atheism or science and rationalism versus whether you have a faith in the society or go by the religion.
No, when I say superstition, I also mean false beliefs. I think H.G. Wells, in his beautiful synthesis of the history of the world, he made the point that all religions, I'm paraphrasing what H.G. Wells said, they started as fetishes. What is a fetish? You see something happening, you perceive it with your senses, you don't know the cause. You see something else is happening, you attribute a causal relationship without any evidence. Look at the Hindu mythology. Even today, I don't know if that's being told to young children in villages, but I remember being told as a kid, if there is a thunder, then you see the way the story is woven. In Mahabharata, Arjuna, one of the Pandavas, he was going in his chariot, and Arjuna's chariot's, the screw, I believe, fell down.
Right, I heard that.
And that is thunder, because that's such a great warrior and a great chariot going at lightning speed or so on and so forth. How absurd it is. But basically what is happening? You try to find a silly causal relationship between a consequence you can see and a cause you pretended is there. In a way, it's very crude proto-science. It's not science in the sense it's not based on evidence and logic. It's not based on experimentation, but trying to find some kind of a relationship when you don't understand. I think all tribal societies and early religions really are about that. What happened? In some cases, it is shown that some of the causal relations are probably true and therefore became slowly science. Some of it is nonsensical, therefore became superstition or faith. If you view it that way, I don't think that a deep faith of your own kind, whatever faith you believe in, whatever kind of a God you imagine, is necessarily incompatible with science. Einstein, for instance, was a pantheistic man. He never claimed to be an atheist. Now, can you and I claim that we have a greater and more rational understanding of science and causal relationships and evidence and logic? It will be the height of arrogance, right?
Right.
Or Newton, for instance, to the best of my knowledge, Newton was a believer. And he also believed essentially in superstitious things. Some silly things he also did.
Yeah.
So this notion that you have to necessarily aggressively propagate atheism, godlessness, in order to propagate science and further science of the rational method is not borne by evidence, historical evidence. So again, I go back. As long as there is no superstition, as long as your faith is not inimical to a rational approach of your mind and a rational approach of a logical approach to what you see and what you experience in the world and what you think, I don't think that these two are fundamentally opposed. The moment I am aggressively arguing with you that there is no God, then you're actually creating a schism. So the problem is when there's a deterministic kind of a thing. I remember watching a film, I forget the lead actors in those days, big actors. This is about teaching evolution in American school.
Right.
Now, the issue is whether evolution should be banned or not banned.
A lot of church groups argue against it to this day.
Yes. So, in other words, if a religious faith becomes not merely religious faith of a pantheistic kind, a faith in the unseen and unknown God, but it actually becomes a doctrine which is infallible, unchangeable, not at all amenable to logic and cannot be challenged by logic. When the senses tell you, see, when the senses cannot tell you, then it's okay, your religious faith. But when the senses tell you, then that's no longer the kind of religion that is helpful in human society. So the kind of faith I'm talking about, which we should be respectful of, is the faith that is allowing you space for personal growth, rational application of your mind, and acquisition of knowledge through your senses and logic, and a faith that does not allow superstition and personal harm or injury in terms of freedom, in terms of bodily injury, because of some silly, untested, unproven beliefs, or disproved beliefs, or hatred of others. So I'm defining my own sense of what is an acceptable faith. Once you accept this definition, then there's no reason to see faith being incompatible with science.
Absolutely. So, do you believe in determinism, or the whole debate versus determinism versus free will? Do you think we are destined to towards
I'm unquestionably a free will person. If life is deterministic, life becomes nihilistic, so I don't accept it. I don't accept it. No.
Absolutely.
In the very, very long term, billions of years it's deterministic, because you know the star, the little star called the sun is going to perish.
Right.
It's deterministic. That is written in the stars, as they say. As I said, I think it's not very productive if we dwell on that. But within the human lifespan, within our life experience or our imagination, realistic imagination, determinism is a fatal thing. It's a disaster.
Well, as far as life, it ends with us, to us. Who cares about the universe?
That's why I think that's where the humility also is required. At the end of the day, what is it all about? If you ask that question too deeply, you have no answers.
Right. So moving on to this kind of sociology and religion combined, Abrahamic religions tend to be a community-based faith where they go to the mosque or a church together, the Jewish, the synagogues, and they do stuff together, and there is a community building there. That's different from the Eastern religions where the religion is deeply personal. Do you think in some ways not having the head of the religion, where Pope Francis, for example, you were giving, he embraced homosexual couples recently and asked the Catholics to bless them, and Catholics seem to open to be blessing the homosexual couples in their churches who were kept aside for a very long time. In our case, there's no head who would listen to, and everybody has their own beliefs. And do you think that's hampering the community building and the ability to change our society in any way? For example, most of the school teachers in the schools, they tend to still ignore adolescent safety and the sex education and all of that. And when NGOs go there, they tend to walk out of the classrooms apparently, and they don't listen to them and they don't get trained. There's a lot of self-correction required in terms of the woman or the society or the caste system, the institutions of marriage.
There are two different aspects here. One is a church, a God, and a holy book probably created a very doctrinaire approach, an intolerant approach. And that's the reason why Copernicus and Galileo and others know the kind of pain that they had to endure, the kind of rejection of truth for survival, at least at a certain phase of history, was evident. Whereas not having that, almost anything goes. Charvaka, who was an atheist, he propagated atheism. He was a Hindu saint. If there was a holy book, and there was a church, and if there was a pope, I don't think that Charvaka could have been tolerated. He would have been probably crucified. So I think the charm of Hindu philosophy is that almost anything goes. You can be an atheist, you can be an agnostic, you can be something else. Kanada, for instance, the man who first propagated the idea of atoms, the small indivisible particles. Now, of course, we know it's divisible, etc. So many of these people, even science was seen as spiritualism.
Right.
So I don't think that's a disadvantage. Actually, if there's one redeeming feature of Hinduism, the most ugly feature being casteism, the hierarchical nature by birth, merit being imparted by birth, not by virtue of your talent and your actions and the consequences, but by birth. That's a terrible thing, that whole philosophical framework. But if you take that away, the reason why the Hindu philosophy of the Indian society embraced almost every culture, every idea, and integrated that without much pain or without much difficulty, and without being swept off its feet. And that's why, despite considerable years of Islamic rule by invasion, etc., India is one of the few societies which did not get converted from it.
Like the Middle East.
It's a sole exception, probably.
Right.
The whole world, there's almost no other example like that. So I think that may well be the strength. The second part is partly true, that much of the Hindu traditional faith is about the relationship between the bhakta, the individual, the devotee, and the divine. The society probably did not play as much a role as it probably could have. But I think, again, it's only a partial understanding of the Hindu philosophy, in my judgment. I'm not a scholar. I'm sure there are people who really have studied and understood. They can really discuss that. But the whole of Bhagavad Gita is about do your karma. It didn't say merely show your devotion to God. What is karma? That you have a duty to perform in a society.
The duty of
So it is, in a way, a reconciliation of your individual desires and goals, including the desire for moksha, with your duty to society around you. And in later years, Bhakti movement was essentially about also uplifting society, fighting inequalities. And then Swami Vivekananda, maybe influenced by the West, I do not know, Mahatma Gandhi, among others, they actually brought again the spirit of community service as part of the Hindu philosophical outlook. Swajhaya movement of Pandana Shastra Thawale, deeply rooted in the Indian philosophy and the scriptures and the traditional faith. Or you take Narayan Guru. The whole of Narayan Guru, if Kerala society's strengths are as we perceive today, it's largely because of Narayan Guru. He transformed the society. The Swajhaya movement, Paramahimsa, he transformed all the villages on the coast of Maharashtra and Gujarat, the Konkan coast, fishermen's villages, and transformed their lives, drawing inspiration from the tenets of indigenous philosophy. So, while there is no formal structure and therefore there is no formal link of communitarian approach to religion, I think in the Hindu philosophy and practice, this communitarian philosophy is integral.
And the being skeptical part you mentioned, I think that's important, and that's how the Buddhism and the Jainism and the Sikhism came about. If they were killed in the
and you made them gods in Hindu pantheon. I mean, in whichever faith do you make the most heterodox rebel, like the Lord Buddha, one of the avatars of Mahavishnu? Right. So this is an amazing thing. So I don't think that having or not having a church and a holy book is a disadvantage. It probably is an advantage.
Right. That I very much agree. But the coming back to the communities not building themselves, and self-correction is one area where we could probably improve.
I would put it slightly differently. Our understanding of community because of the caste system has become extremely narrow, at least at some phase of our life. Therefore, the caste groups, caste panchayats, they were pretty vibrant throughout our history.
Okay.
But they could not transcend all of humanity. At least not in all cases. That's one thing. And second is, while we have phenomenal strengths, for instance, of family as a unit. India is one of the few societies where family is sacrosanct. You live and you die for the family. You even kill for the family if necessary. And the sense of dharma transcending religion and faith. What is right and wrong, a sense of what is morally acceptable and not acceptable, is very pervasive in India beyond religion. And that's the reason why we are able to maintain order in society where the state structure is notoriously inefficient and corrupt. It's not the state that is maintaining order in society in India. And people are largely governed by what the society thinks of their actions. What will others think of me? Everybody knows everybody else. And therefore, 99% of the people behave 99% of the time reasonably in an acceptable manner. In a country where there's no law, no meaningful rule of law, you don't see much crime.
Right.
It's not so much because of the fear of law, it's because what will others think if I behave like this? So all these are our strengths. But we have weaknesses as a society. And I believe every society has weaknesses. It's not Indian society alone. Only thing is the weaknesses are not, they're like a card game. You get some strong suits, I get some strong suits. You get some weak suits, I get some weak suits. Your weak suits are not my weak suits necessarily. But all of us get some strengths, all of you get some weaknesses. If there are these strengths, what are the weaknesses in our society? The first is what I already mentioned, and we all understand, moral neutrality to inequality by birth. Because this whole acceptance of the caste system, inequality by birth, as a natural order of things, has so influenced our thinking that we are not sufficiently perturbed by the notion that somebody is treated as unequal by birth and is not getting the opportunities. It should be offensive to a sensitive mind. The second is, because we are broken up, fragmented into so many castes and other groups, etc., mostly hierarchical groups, there is trust within a family, within a group, and in the modern context, maybe within a profession or a trade union. But across these groups, trust collapses. Very commonly we hear Telugu speak of Tamils as Aravam, and Tamils, I'm sure, use some equally pejorative words about Telugu people. The North Indians about the South Indians, South Indians about the North Indians, Hindus about Muslims, and Muslims about Hindus. So it's not even malicious. It's almost unthinking. So the trust, both horizontally and vertically. We mistrust the government at the national level, but we don't want to trust and empower the governments at the local level. In India, in a political sense, power always must stop where you are. If you are in a state, You don't want power at the union level, even if it's necessary for the larger survival of the federation for certain collective functions. You certainly don't want to transfer powers to the local governments and give the opportunity for the people to shape their lives. Very typically Indian. Right. Trust, both vertically and horizontally, there's a lot of mistrust. The third is there is no sense of common fate. Breaking the queues, the spitting on the roads, and 100 other things, the traffic offences you see every time. It's frightening to drive on Indian roads. It's not so much infrastructure alone. But I think this has to be cultivated. And this is where the secular state, the rule of law, enforcement also is important. So I think these three are problems. They're not extraordinary problems. They're not insurmountable problems, but they're problems. We must while there's no reason to be apologetic about your own culture and civilization, if you're not mindful of the problems in a modern context, if you don't address them by societal reform, by state structure, by a rule of law framework, and by education that actually tells us what is in our best interest collectively, then we pay a price. So I view it that way. I don't think it's really an issue of secular or religious thing. It's more about each society having its own fatal flaws. And it applies to the so-called secular countries which reject God. It applies to religious countries. It applies to all societies. Human societies are not that much different, really. Right. Only thing is, they are not identical in the same respects, but we all have roughly similar features, similar approaches. So I don't believe that Indians are different from Europeans, or different from Americans, or different from indigenous people, or different from somebody else. Now, this is all, anybody with a modicum of understanding of anthropology knows that all this is, much of it is bunkum.
Given time, everybody would have the same aspirations. Absolutely. And want the same quality of life. I totally understand. So improving the rule of law on the roads would make it better, is what you would say, because when I drive on the roads, I see ambulances getting stuck and people ahead of them.
Oh, it's frightening. It's just frightening. It's like a race. It doesn't matter what the consequences are, and we're not mindful. Part of it is because of a socialist culture to start with, you have to somehow get ahead. You're not confident of what's going to happen. There's no predictability in terms of getting what you need to get in a fair manner. And therefore, everybody is for herself or himself. That approach, I think, even in driving, etc., continues. And the state has woefully failed in the limited areas where the state should have succeeded. I'll give you an example. A more secular, recent, silly example, but it nevertheless holds a torch to what's happening in our country. There is a CCTV camera system in Hyderabad city.
Probably 1 million cameras.
The city police claims that no, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cameras are there, and traffic cameras are there. And several people, they got notices about imposing fines once, violated the rules. What do governments do? Instead of enforcing the penalties in order to inflict pain so that their behavior, their conduct changes. That is the purpose of a penalty. Right. Not to collect a revenue from them as a tax. It is to change your behavior, because if you deviate from the norm, then you have to pay. Mm-hmm. The economic pain, hopefully, is something that deters you from committing the same offense tomorrow. What do government after government do? In order to get votes in the short term, they want to waive these penalties as if, it's a welfare measure. There's a complete misreading of what the purpose is.
The wrong incentive.
So this is the perversion of democracy. Ultimately, it's detrimental to the public good, but it's couched as if it is beneficial to the individuals because you don't know how to repay the penalty. Let the society collectively be damned, and your child may be facing an accident and get injured, or somebody may die. And we have probably one of the highest fatality rates in the world. Right. It's a disgrace. So, in some respects, half-baked democracy, where the individuals and collective interest of the society is not adequately factored in our democratic operation by very highly centralized power structure, there's no link between the vote and the consequences that follow, I think that also is causing further damage.
So you have seen plenty of people in your life speaking about various issues on the TVs, in the assembly, and in your office. But there's a lot of argument that the public discourse in this country is really substandard. Why do you think that's the case? Is it the education system that failed, or how did the intellectuals of this country fail to raise the bar?
I think there are three failings. First is unquestionably our education is a disaster. Indians are intelligent, curious, there's a tremendous civilizational strength for centuries. But we created a monstrous system which is getting worse, not better. Where physical infrastructure is improving, resource allocation is improving, the understanding or the concern for outcomes is diminishing at large. There are, of course, exceptions. I'm talking about the broader thing. Because 40, 50 years ago, it was better. Notwithstanding what people say in Macaulay's education or this or that, these are all very superficial explanations in my view. There was a greater sense of, link between what you learn in textbooks and what happens in society. That's understood better. And that's somehow communicated even in an age of very primitive technologies and so on and so forth. So it's gotten worse. Now it's all about some soulless, silly examinations based on either rote learning and mass copying, and it's just a piece of paper, not the outcomes that matter. And certainly that hurt us very badly. The second is the media. Ultimately, in any society, media is an elite institution in the sense that the more thoughtful people, more observant people, they use the freedom of speech, the power to mobilize people, conscientize them, educate them, enlighten them, and generate healthy public discourse.
Yes, sir.
So that in the minds of people, alternative options are there, and verified by their own experience and their thinking, they come to conclusions, and the democratic mandates then deliver verdicts, and people deliver. Our media, increasingly, while becoming technologically more and more sophisticated on par with the rest of the world, our public discourse is one of the shallowest in the media itself. It's like a 2020 cricket match. Everything is excitement and polarization and shouting and that kind of stuff, rather than thoughtful, unhurried deliberation. The third is the political process. If the political process allowed the growth of the competent and the rational and public-spirited people through merit and competence by persuading the fellow human beings, however flawed it is, by a genuinely democratic process within the party and within the political electoral system, then probably the more rational elements like the enlightened leaders of the freedom struggle, whether it's Mahatma Gandhi or Nehru or Patel or Bose or Rajaji or many, many others of our stands, some of the most thoughtful and some of the most intelligent and some of the most public-spirited human beings, men and women, rose in leadership at that time. It's amazing.
Yes.
Given the low level of education, abject poverty, and very poor communications, that a galaxy of leaders of extraordinary caliber rose at that time. I mean, the only country which can be compared with that is United States during the formative years. Such galaxy of leaders. Probably India actually outscores in that respect. Yes. So it was there then, but the political process became so distorted. Families, individuals, parties have become political fiefdoms, private estates. And the electoral process has become completely debauched. And therefore, the rational elements do exist, but very rarely are they allowed to ascend through ethical and rational means. And therefore, the rational elements are either compromised by the means that they apply, or they are denied the opportunity. And therefore, once you are in power, you tend to dominate the discourse, and you tend to set the standard. It's not that there is complete absence of rational approach in India.
Absolutely.
But that's not allowed to grow. I think it's a combination of all three. We have to work on all three.
So, speaking of the education, the infrastructure in public schools are not comparable to the world standards, but arguably, as
compared to what it was, is much better.
Much better.
Yes.
In certain parts of the country, maybe in certain parts of the country, they are still not so good. But the outcomes, as you keep mentioning for quite some time, are appalling and probably one of the world's worst, or the worst. So how can 1 crore teachers who are ill-equipped, under-equipped and ill-motivated and underfunded in terms of the infrastructure perspective for the digital learning or the libraries or the science labs, be motivated
while
to
more
increase
resources and more technology are welcome and necessary, I would not like to overemphasize this underfunded and under-equipped part.
Okay.
Why? 50 years ago, when they were much less funded, much less equipped, and on average, though the access to education is limited to only a few because there's a capacity limitation, physical capacity limitation, And also the caste structure was much more rigid, and therefore, except a few church schools, most of the scheduled caste did not really have access to even a school. But once you give relevance to them, those who had the good fortune to go to a school, even underfunded undergraduate school, many of them came out much better than today. So while there cannot be an argument against more resources and more better equipment, to think that that is an answer in itself is wrong. And India, by contemporary Indian standards, we're not spending very small money either. We are spending about 90,000 rupees, 100,000 rupees per school child per year, which by Indian standards is quite phenomenal. It's very significant. It's on par with the high-end private school fees in many states. So while money is welcome, I'm not opposed to that, but to think that putting more money is solving the problems is wrong. And some people argue that 6% of GDP should be on education. I don't know where this number has come.
I think it's a Qatari commission that recommended.
I don't know what is the rationale behind it, but now it's a mantra. But there's no evidence that more spending is generating more outcomes. Again, I'm not opposed to spending, but thinking that that's the answer, that's what I'm opposed to. Outcomes, even with a limited spend, can be substantially improved. I think the heart of the issue is the examination system. Let me go back to my own personal experience. When we were kids in school, maybe it was some of the better parts of the country, though rural, maybe we were lucky, all the time prepared to learn, but it didn't happen in one place or one village. It happened in hundreds of, maybe thousands of villages to hundreds of thousands of kids. So there's a lesson to be learned. What happened suddenly? One government, very unwisely, I don't think it was wantonly done, maliciously done, but they didn't think through the consequences. They yielded to populism. The teachers wanted to be provincialized instead of being accountable to local governments, like for instance the school boards in the United States and the school districts. Instead of being accountable locally, they wanted to be unaccountable here and be directly linked to the provincial government. And in India, provincial governments are as big as countries.
Right.
I mean, an Indian province is typically bigger than 90% of the countries of the world. The moment the salaries are paid by them and the link is snapped at the local level, the school started declining. As if that were not enough, the government also said examinations don't matter. And even if you flunk in examinations, you go to the next grade automatically. Now, it's not that many people flunked earlier, but there was this aspiration that you have to meet this standard to go to the next grade. And a few people, when they could not measure up to that, they were given some additional opportunity, some assistance, but if they, whatever reason they could not measure up to that, maybe 5-10% had to repeat. Once that stopped,
there's no fear.
Then there's no measurement of outcome. We indulged in a myth that outcomes are not important, learning is not important. We pretend it is school, pretend they are grades, to the point that probably the epitome of that is the Right to Education Act of 2009 said, if a child of 12, I'm paraphrasing what the law actually says, is admitted to the school for the first time, the child shall be admitted to an age-appropriate class, not learning-appropriate class. If I'm illiterate, I must start from the beginning for my own sake, right?
Yes.
If I'm put in 8th grade because I'm 12 years old, because that's age-appropriate, but I know I can't even read, what am I doing? Are you helping this child?
Okay.
So this kind of orthodoxy, in the name of welfare, in the name of compassion, misplaced compassion, that governs. So there's a reason why schools declined actually. So what I'm saying is, yes, more inputs are welcome. And in this day and age with technology and practically everywhere, there's a possibility of access to Wi-Fi, etc. And there's so much of material available globally. Even if there are some deficiencies in physical infrastructure and even in human infrastructure, technology to some extent at least can overcome that. So I have no quarrel about more technology and more resources. But the crux of the issue is we must go back to focusing on outcomes. What is it that the child at that age should be learning for her future as life skills to be a productive member of society, both economically and socially?
One part of it would be the examination pattern, as you keep saying.
Exactly. Therefore, if outcomes are to be measured, then examination. You decide what are the outcomes.
But I just want to examine this a little deeper. That would prove that a child is not learning as per his age, as is demonstrated by tons of reports outside, like ASER or the National Achievement Survey.
PISA,
But would that,
PISA, the global survey PISA.
yes. So would that really increase the learning, though, is my question? Because all these teachers...
So it depends on how you set the goal. If the goal actually is testing your understanding and application of knowledge, yes. If it's testing your rote learning, then no. That's why the quality of assessment is critical. If the assessment does not test whether or not you are learning, there's no assessment at all, it's a joke. It must be amenable to both understanding your conceptual understanding and application of knowledge, and not amenable to rote learning. And of course, mass copying. That's the function of an educator, to design such an evaluation system.
Right.
If you fail, you failed in education. So the rest of the world is doing, and enlightened institutions within India are doing, why can't you do it? But that's your job.
They have better curriculum and better teaching methods that were developed over time and seems to be stagnated over the last couple of decades, as you keep saying. So proving that the child did not learn is one thing, and actually making him learn is another thing, in my point.
It's a great question. It's a great question. One way is the traditional, no, I will recruit better teachers, I'll train them better, I'll motivate them, I'll monitor them, I'll do this, that. You do all that. The fact that you haven't done for 77 years doesn't give me confidence that you'll do it better now. I have no reason to believe that you'll do it. But I'm prepared to grant good intentions to you.
Yes.
But that does not give me any sense of comfort or satisfaction that outcomes are going to improve just because you say so. You may be a good guy. Therefore, I don't want to go by that. You do it all. That's your duty anyway. It's my money. Public money is being spent. For heaven's sake, do it. But I don't want to rely on that alone. One unique advantage that India has, I'm sure many societies now have, but certainly India has, is irrespective of caste, region, religion, language. All families want their children to succeed. And succeed in education.
Yes.
But the problem is, they don't understand what is the meaning of success in education. And they don't know how to measure it. So the only understanding they have is, if my kid got so much so-and-so rank, or 99% scores, then that is success, because that's what the world is telling the parents, the society. Ranks and marks. And if a soulless, stupid examination system based on mass copying or rote learning without any conceptual understanding or skills gives me 99%, I don't know, I don't care. 99% is what I'm looking at. So the whole system is geared towards that. Now, use it to your advantage. You redefine success. If success in language is comprehension and communication, it's not mugging up a few poems or passages. If success in mathematics is understanding the concepts and application of the concepts for problem solving, if success in science is logical application of mind and derive conclusions from the given facts, then make that the standard.
And you think that there would be a natural drive towards...
Once you put that and make sure that the examination is not amenable to copying, because now I have to add that. The integrity of examination system itself is in doubt. Yes. Once you do, and this is very easily doable. I am betting, and after that you do everything else. All that you want to do, better teachers, better training, better monitoring, better this, please do that. Better books, better tools, please all do all that. But do this. I am betting that the whole society will figure out a way, because there's so much of a desperation to give their children a head start. Private, public, tuitions, teaching at home, giving a job opportunity, all kinds of open source software, 1,000 things will happen.
Yes.
Because we have a monumental crisis. There are 280 million school kids in India. They would be bigger than almost all nations of the world, save 4.
Yes.
So you can't now say, no, I will do this, I will take another 75 years, and then we'll fail in 75 years, then say, no, I'll do something else. No, thank you. Do this. Trust the people. They know what is best for themselves. As long as you set the right kind of a goal, they know they want to reach that goal. Trust them.
should be the first priority.
Absolutely.
The things that needs to be done.
And public sector, private sector, unlike American and other debates, no, vouchers in India, people of India, the poorest people of India are voting with their feet. Every year, enrollment in private schools is increasing in a desperately poor country. Poor people, parents paying out of proportion to their income large sums to private sector. So in India, all this don't matter, private, public. People want their children to be educated, period. It's for you to define what is getting educated and measure it honestly and intelligently.
That's an interesting answer, sir. I want to deviate a little bit to the blood shortage. As a student in undergrad in my university, I happened to organize a blood donation drive for thalassemia sickle cell patient, and that's how I got to know about the shortage and all of it. And it moved me a little bit. There's about 1 million units shortage of blood in this country, acknowledged by the Ministry of Health. And the number of blood banks in Telugu states are the highest among the country, about 470 in the Telugu states. The second highest is Uttar Pradesh, 436, that has probably more than twice our population. Obviously, there seems to be some celebrity interest in this blood donation drive, which happened to have increased the blood donation drives in our state. But the overall country, there's 1 million units. In a country of 1.4 billion people, how come we never figured this in? How do you?
So it's a solvable problem. See, the good part of it is 1 million units is nothing.
Yes.
For India. The bad part is more than the people's willingness. Because Indian people are by nature very charitable, like any other people. You go to temples, you go outside, you go to traffic islands, if somebody is begging, somebody is in need of alms. Even poor people simply give out. So it's not lack of charitable thing. It's because we haven't created an institutional framework. Blood banks require a credible storage mechanism and a trust and confidence that you're not using those blood products for commercial advantage at my cost. These two things are necessary. Wherever that is created by the individual initiative or some administrators on occasion, or organizations like Red Cross, because in India, Red Cross is traditionally headed by the governor in each state. So wherever somebody in Raj Bhavan or that office and some others have taken some serious interest, built infrastructure, mobilized the community and non-profit organizations, then like in Telugu states, as you said, you have this. Wherever that effort is not made, only the commercial things and some hospitals try to do that. Result is happening. Nowadays, because of social media, whenever there is a need, you simply post something, and actually, whenever somebody posts saying that I want so-and-so blood, within minutes you see dozens of people responding. Yes. So it's not the people. Have you created the infrastructure and the trust? If you do that, this is a very, very solvable problem.
Yes, absolutely.
But to go a little beyond that, I'm a medical doctor by training. You also have to go into the demand side problem. Thalassemia you mentioned. Many, many problems should have been avoided. In a well-managed country with a decent healthcare system and genetic and health counseling, you should not have so many thalassemia cases in the first place. It is because of consanguinity. When first cousins marry, two recessive genes, when they come together, it becomes dominant now, and therefore diseases manifest in a child. So thalassemia, people keep talking about thalassemia in India because very large number of cases there. Why? Yeah. Consanguineous marriages. So, while we have to address the problem as it exists, we also have to think a little into the future and educate the people and counsel them so that this marriage is within the family and some other abnormalities, for instance, pregnancy beyond a certain age of the mother. Some of these things, in some cases, infections like, rubella infection, German measles. It took me years and years of fight to persuade the union government to introduce this measles and rubella vaccine. Now measles and rubella is part of the national vaccination program for the poor. Earlier, the middle classes were getting out of pocket. The poor did not get it, and we had hundreds of thousands of people suffering from congenital abnormalities, preventable, on account of it. So there are some preventable factors which must address also simultaneously.
So we can reduce the demand for it, or probably the road accidents that we have in this country.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I'd go on to the environment. This country always had a lot of respect for environment, despite its huge population. We still could consider to be doing well with the forest and the wildlife acts and all of that. But with the increasing population, how do you see the environment violations not being rampant?
It's a challenge because human population and nature are oftentimes at loggerheads. Even in the earlier times, while there were not much of population pressure. The moment we started cooking and using fire, what are we using? Firewood. But the advantage is, while our density of population, deforestation over centuries, not today, India among large countries probably has the largest extent of agricultural land. 50% of all of Indian land is agricultural. There is no large country in the world which has more percentage of land agricultural. That means the traditional forests have failed and converted into agricultural land for centuries, not today, for 2,000 years, 3,000 years. You take America, which is 3 times India's size, it roughly has the same amount of agricultural land. You take China, which is 3 times India's size, which has 40% less agricultural land in India.
Yes.
So obviously that has consequences. But there's no reason to despair. I'm an optimist. World over, technological progress and economic prosperity have actually reduced pollution, did not increase.
The emissions particularly.
Technology, alternative, for instance, now alternative fuels are coming, renewable energy. For instance, instead of using firewood for fire, in my village, my aunt, elderly aunt, she used all this thing and then the firewood. No, there's no other way of doing it. But now, for instance, Ujjwal scheme or something else, now gas. Similarly, electricity instead of the old-fashioned things. So all these are slowly changing things. So, and particularly with the recent technologies, renewable energies and economically viable technologies, I think things will only get better. And population also, one good news is, in India in particular, we are now reaching close to that plateau level. We are now at 144 crore of 1.44 billion. We probably will reach 1.6 billion. It's a significant number, but for India, another 10% is not a big deal. And then we're going to taper off. And meanwhile, with prosperity, with technology, with better way of doing things, I think we can crack that. But we must be conscious of that. For instance, even now, take Delhi city, at least some of the problems attributed to the massive fires engineered in the farmlands of Punjab and Haryana. Because with the mechanical equipment now, as opposed to earlier harvesting of crops, mechanical harvesters, you have a significant amount of the that the plant biomass left unused. Earlier, they used to simply convert into straw. It went for animal fodder. Whereas now, I believe there is a technological problem. And so for farmers, it's economically viable if they simply burn it rather than they cut it and dispose it off. So we have to find, there are technical solutions. Now we can create wealth out of waste. You can convert it into some other mix into medium density fiber and many other things. So, and there's a lot of money available. Union government, for instance, has under CAMPA funds, compensated forestation funds, tens of thousands of crores of money available, billions of rupees available. It's just that we're working in silos. We're not working in coordination, even in government agencies, finding this technology, economic utility, and therefore alter the incentives for the farmers. So if you're a little smarter with current technologies and developing technologies and greater prosperity, I think pollution problem will become more manageable, not less. It doesn't mean that we should not be conscious of it, should not continuously fight that. But I think there is light at the end of the tunnel, provided you're a little smart.
So I'll move on to the criminal justice and the judicial reforms you keep talking about. Quite a while ago, I heard an interview of U. Lalit, our former Chief Justice, and Neil Katyal, the Solicitor General under the Obama administration. They were talking about the law in comparison. US Supreme Court hears about 75 to 85 cases in a year.
Absolutely.
Whereas one bench in Indian court would hear the same amount in a day.
Absolutely.
Do you think that there's fundamentally wrong with the way cases are being sent to the Supreme Court, all the case filing? Like, could you just expand a little bit more?
The problem lies not only with the others, but also with the court itself. The Supreme Court is behaving like a trial court. It has devalued itself. It is meant to be the constitutional court of India and the highest court of appeal. It could have, at the very least, done two things, both, not one of them. One, discourage appeals on all and sundry matters, unless it's a fundamental constitutional issue. Or original jurisdiction under Supreme Court, like for instance, union-state relationships or disputes between states, etc. Or of course, the very challenging of fundamental rights.
Constitutional rights.
Constitutional rights. And two, apart from that, they could have created actually two separate benches, one a permanent constitutional bench to look at really the grave cases, and the other, the Supreme Court appellate functions for all the sundry cases. They did neither. Justice became incredibly dilatory, frightfully expensive. For a country as poor as India, the litigation in Supreme Court and High Courts is astronomical costs. In fact, even as an organization, when I occasionally want to utilize the mechanism of judiciary to try and engineer reform, I have to think 100 times, can we afford it? Who is a lawyer? How can I pay? It's ridiculous. So partly the court's own failing. And while the Supreme Court has this problem, in the United States, as you rightly said, they only hear about 100 cases, and if there are some cases unheard at the end of the calendar year,
they get lapsed.
They get lapsed. Another day will come. After all, there are a million issues that may theoretically come up under the Constitution. You don't have to decide all of them today. They will decide what merits their consideration at a point of time. It's not chronological. And you'll have a hearing on some other occasion. Heavens are not going to fall if issue is unresolved. By taking up 1,000 cases a day and pretending you are delivering justice without you knowing a single word about it, you're not doing any service to anybody. So we have to rethink that. But if you take away that Supreme Court, but that's not the real problem for the ordinary litigants, most of them, the trial courts and the High Court are a disaster, even more of them. There are 50 million cases pending in India. In a typical trial court, most of the forenoon, 3 hours, is spent in so-called call work. You post 40 or 50 cases that day. You have only time to hear but the most 2 cases that day. But knowing full well you post 40 cases. So first 3 hours call work. Ultimately you hear something desultorily for 2-3 hours. So the management of cases, apart from the inadequacies of infrastructure and inadequacies of number of courts and judges, all these are true. And terrible procedures. Ultimately, there is no recourse to justice in India. Most people despair of justice in India. That's the reason why the criminal cases far outnumber civil cases in India, unlike any other modern society. Typically, in a modern society, crimes will be of certain magnitude depending on the society, but as the economy becomes more and more sophisticated, as the economic interactions take place, there will be disputes. How come with more sophisticated economy there are fewer civil cases? Because people despair of getting justice in India, don't even bother to go to courts. The problem of Indian courts is not the pendency in courts alone. It is the missing civil cases because most people don't want to go to courts. If somebody wants to come to you for counseling and say, look, I have a dispute with X and shall I go to court? Most of us, including sitting judges, will privately tell them, don't go to court, don't waste your time. Sit it out of court, suffer even some loss, doesn't matter, that's cheaper, or go to a politician or a police officer, give a bribe, or go to a ganda and get something rough and ready done. This is the reality of our country. So there is a disaster in the form of rule of law in the country. Normally we pretend all kinds of things, but there is no realistic hope of any justice in civil cases. Criminal cases, a Prime Minister's murder took 18 years to get convicted. The fellow was going to jail. So, on Mahatma Gandhi's death, remember, within 1 year we executed the killers. So it's not necessary to be this bad. We made it this bad.
So the more number of trial courts and the reforms in the system.
More trial courts, better procedures, better quality of judges, and strong and independent prosecution, strengthening investigative agencies, but making them accountable. Without accountability, it's a disaster. And then forensics. It took 365 days, 1 full year, for a DNA analysis in Delhi city in a notorious, very highly publicized case. Yes. Let alone in districts and small towns, in the national capital. It's absurd.
Yes. So we'll move on to some predictions on how you'd see the future. Industrial revolution had definitely made the muscles redundant, and the AI now make our brain redundant to some extent. And let's say in 50 to 75 years, if in your words, we eliminate all the avoidable suffering, hopefully we will.
So what is the uniqueness of the modern technology? There is fusion of the physical, the traditional engineering, the digital. We all know the computing in the last 50, 60, 70 years, and the biological, the genetics and genome and things like that. It's the first time all these independently were developing, but there was never the fusion of the kind that, for instance, no additive manufacturing, 3D printing is fusion of the physical with digital. And then most of the healthcare, more than the last 15 years, I'm told, there's almost no new drug discovery for cancer because chemotherapy is no longer the relevant thing, only old chemotherapeutic agents. It's increasingly gene treatment and so on. So the world is moving in that direction. It's an extraordinary opportunity for human society. And I truly believe that for the first time in human history, we have the capacity to fulfill all human potential with our available resources and to eliminate all avoidable suffering. If we have the wisdom and the skill to design institutions to take advantage of the modernity technology. But it's not without challenges. One challenge obviously is technology is always a double-edged sword, and just as it could help, there could be problems of job creation, problems of abuse of technology, problems of unforeseen consequences, and accidents, cyber warfare. I don't have an answer. I think there are bigger minds, greater minds. They're at work, and hopefully we'll find answers. But there's another problem. Human society has acquired the capacity to produce more and more with fewer and fewer people.
Yes.
And that has two consequences. One, employment. If a few people produce more and more, all wealth is only in their hands, and without producing, we can't afford to transfer wealth. What is going to happen to the rest of the people who are, by definition, not employed? And two, it's not merely money. You can say, all right, if total wealth is aggregating much more, then we can provide some other mechanisms. We can distribute it, while it's desirable or undesirable, we can theoretically find answers. But it's not merely about distribution and putting some money into pockets. Employment also is about dignity and a sense of purpose and value in life.
Absolutely.
People like Mahatma Gandhi always fought for full employment, not merely as an economic issue, it's also a human dignity issue. Therefore, I think one of the great challenges of the future is, how are we going to deal with this employment conundrum? Fewer and fewer people are producing more and more in society. All this without generating more and more waste, but that problem is probably being cracked right now. Unlike 30, 40 years ago when the throwaway culture and waste became a big issue, I think slowly we're grappling with the problem. While it appears right now still big, and it is big. The other day I was astounded to hear that all your e-commerce companies, Amazon and others, the number of the goods that are sent back, because now consumer is the king,
yeah.
And if you don't like it, you just send back, no questions asked. I believe annually $800 billion worth of commodities are sent back, and the company, once it gets back, Amazon or some other company, doesn't know what to do because the cost of repackaging is greater than the price that they can procure for that. And therefore, they're trying to figure out what to do with all this waste. Some amazing thing. I didn't know this. But I think it's still a remnant of the past, because with better and better technology, we are probably trying to eliminate waste more and more. But still, we have to address that question too. So there are challenges, but I also see immense opportunities. And as an optimist, I believe that human society will actually seize the opportunities and confront the challenges.
What about the leisure that comes with this challenge? What would humans
do
with all the leisure?
The flip side of the underemployment, unemployment. You don't require to work that hard. That means already I think human society is creating more and more activities in pursuit of fun and leisure. I think there's going to be a much bigger industry of that kind to lead a purposive and good life without being silly or dysfunctional, etc. That certainly is an extension of the unemployment problem, yes.
Elon Musk argues that we already depend on our phones for computational and the memory power. So why not have a chip in our brain that could actually do the job in the brain itself, in our body? Would you be looking forward to a day where humans have chips in their minds?
I don't look forward to it. I'm not a great fan of such things. Each of us has a threshold. For me, a bionic man is probably a threshold I would not like to cross. Certainly, for instance, as a medical doctor by training, I recognize the value of those chips and other things, which can now stimulate the brain in a paralyzed human being and actually make them walk, which is a miracle, which is fantastic in neurosciences. So some such things are okay, but otherwise, I'm not too sure that I would like to do that, because then you've converted a human being into bionic. It's no longer your free will, it's no longer your intellect and talent, and it's nothing but a computer, but with the flesh and blood. I don't think I would want that. And don't ask me why, I can't even explain that very coherently, but there is a threshold which I don't like to cross, and each person has a threshold.
When someone talks about bureaucrats in India, one could imagine Huxer or Cow or VP Menon. Who would be your favorite bureaucrat in pre-independent or independent India, and why is that?
I have never thought about this question. I don't think I was asked ever. But now that you ask me, off the cuff, a couple of names come to my mind. A man called Thomas Munro. Simply because he created the Raithwari system, recognized the tenancy rights and broke out of the Zamindari system in the Madras presidency. And that's the reason why the south of Vindhyas, the British India, is far more progressive economically and socially than, let's say, UP Bihar. Not because they're any inferior, because their system was Jamindari system where the rights of the tenants were not recognized. And once they're not recognized, it's a vassal system, medieval system, whereas here it became a modern system. So I think we should be grateful to him and people like Sir Arthur Cotton. Of course, I love Cotton. He's not a traditional civil servant, but he's an engineer, he's a civil servant. Cotton, I was in East Godavari district. I have some idea of what he has done. In a time of adversity, there was no railway track, there was no road. When he built, for instance, the aqueduct across the one branch of Godavari called Vasishta Godavari, about a kilometer across, he built it in one working season because half the year it was flooding. The other half also, the backwaters quite close to the sea. There was no transport. Local soil was not fit for bricks. There was no concrete. It was all brick and mortar, lime mortar. The local workers are not skilled, therefore I had to ferry the workers. And he completed the project in one working season.
Wow.
So these two people come to mind. Close
Anyone
to
in
independence,
India?
Indian servants, early days of independence, V.P. Menon's work in integration of princely states, I think it's not adequately told. The enormity of what he has accomplished, along with, under the guidance of Sardar Patel, the great builder of India. Patel was an exceptional statesman, underrated in my judgment, an extraordinary statesman. 550 princely states, without a shot being fired except in the state of Hyderabad, where only 6 soldiers were killed. All in about 18 months of time, without bitterness. Compare that with Italy. It took 23 years to unify 9 provinces of the same religion, same language, same skin color. Or between 1862 and 1871, in Germany, 39 German provinces, again same language, same religion, except that Bavaria was Catholic, others were Protestant, and same skin color, same history and civilization. Bismarck with blood and iron, he had to unify. And then look at multiple languages, cultures, historical experiences, castes, regions, religions.
Dressing, food.
And unifying all of them remarkably peacefully without any problem. And the duo of Patel and V.P. Menon, what a spectacular job they have done. So
I think that this is something I wanted to ask you for a long while. Carl Jung, one of the founding fathers of psychology, said, if a man knows more than others, he becomes lonely. You're someone that makes me feel dwarfed by your knowledge, and I guess that's a feeling of thousands of others who get inspired by your words every day. And you raise voice on various issues that's largely ignored or conveniently ignored by other Republic intellectuals in this country. Do you ever feel lonely?
in a sense, after a point, we all have to deal with that. Unless you have the internal strength, both the intellectual and the moral strength to withstand loneliness on occasion, I think you can't really accomplish much. So that is a given. It should not be a cause of surprise. At the same time, we must not overestimate our capacity, our ability, etc. We must take it in our stride. No, there's so much of ignorance in us, and there's so much to learn. And we are privileged to be living in a world where there's so much more we can learn every day and absorb. And therefore, I engage myself with young people, with bright people, and I talk to people incessantly. Farmers, tenants, watchmen, migrants, immigrants to a town, or poor families without education, rich families with fanciful education. I learn every day, I absorb like a sponge. So that doesn't make me lonely. Actually, that gives me, they may not always have given serious thought to it and didn't have a framework. It's for me to figure out. But the raw material is coming every day, every hour. And in this day and age, distances are no longer an issue. Therefore, you can still be connected to people with whom you can relate to. And finally, you also must have passions beyond the public work. It's necessary, but no, enjoying good literature, humor, or some other thing, walks and nature, they're very important. So I would like to believe, though I don't think many people agree, I'm a reasonably well-rounded and reasonably happy individual. and I'm pretty much of an optimist.
And that's contagious. So we'd like to close by asking you, what are some of the short-term and the long-term goals of the FDR here?
No, if you look at the broader picture, am I one of those who would like to see India getting $70,000 per capita income? I don't much care. If it happens, I'm not saying no, but see, I'm pro-growth. I understand growth rate is an important number and that encapsulates many, many things. Therefore, people who reject growth rate are not being very wise. But putting all your faith in that number alone is not sufficient either, because if there is a cyclone, if there's a damage because of a cyclone or a flood or a natural disaster, GDP actually goes up. If 100,000 people die in accidents because you have to buy more cars because cars are damaged, you have to give more healthcare, heroic interventions to save some lives and to save some limbs, GDP actually is going up. If you smoke and therefore you get all kinds of diseases from bronchitis to lung cancer, from the cigarette purchase to healthcare interventions to purchase of medicines, etc., GDP is actually going up. So I think we must go beyond that and look at what kind of a society you want, and therefore work backwards as to what your goals are if you're looking for a society of your dreams. So I have a broader philosophy about human wants, and therefore what kind of a society you want to build, and therefore what kind of a goals you should pursue in a very tangible, constitutional, legal, political, economic manner. So that's the way I work, it's more or less backwards. I believe for all individuals, human beings, the first need is survival. Survival of the individual, and that's what your nutrition, your personal health care, your safety and protection, all these are embedded in that. Survival of the species, that's where the reproductive instinct, the family, the children, the future, so on and so forth. But these two are not unique to human beings, except that the forms of expression are unique because of our technological capability and societal sophistication. Every animal has the same instincts. Humankind has transcended that. They have a second order needs, and that is, I would say, for want of a better expression, harmony of two kinds. Harmony in society. Unless there is a harmonious and happy society, we can live with each other comfortably and with a sense of security and peace. Life is unlivable, it's hell. If you're in Gaza, you'll understand what life is.
Yes.
Hell. The second part is harmony in nature. 50 years ago, probably we didn't bother about it, we took it for granted. But now increasingly we know without harmony in nature, even if there's harmony in society in a concrete jungle, life will be unlivable. But even that can be imagine these two elements of harmony. There's a third level, third order, and that is freedom. Freedom of two kinds. The first is an obvious one, the political freedom. Do pretty much what you want to do, express yourself, as long as others are not hurt, etc., subject to those caveats. But that's not enough. You are burdened with or endowed with intellect, unlike any other species, much more than that.
Yes.
And the capacity to allow that intellect to flower, because the speech, learning, receiving from others, so on and so forth. Therefore, intellectual athleticism, if nature endowed you with certain potential, maybe music, maybe art, maybe sport, maybe dance, maybe literature, maybe science, maybe whatever, if that intellectual athleticism is not possible, though potential exists, then it's like you are in a cage. It may not be a physical cage, a jail cell, but it is a cage. You are imprisoned for life. Therefore, the second part of freedom, intellectual freedom, athleticism that you can indulge in, subject to your own genetic predisposition and your own desires. I think these are the human wants. And therefore, how do you convert them into institutional and political and governance goals in the country? And that's why the focus on the political order,
Yes.
kind of how do you allow the right kind of leadership to rise through ethical and rational means in a democratic society with the expression of free will, and therefore the kind of electoral system, the kind of party structure you require. Then how do you fulfill the human potential through quality education accessible to everybody? And healthcare, quality healthcare accessible to everybody without any out-of-pocket burden or without anybody suffering for want of affordability. And then a system of rule of law which maintains harmony in society, competently, swiftly, fairly, justly. And basic infrastructure and other common amenities and goods that we need for pursuing our goals and our dreams and pursue economic growth in society, including basic amenities. And a measure of security in life without having to worry in moments of distress or old age, but in an affordable way. I think these are the goals, and this is what FDR looks at to keep working there for political reforms, for the education and healthcare goals, then fiscal prudence and economic growth prospects, and judiciously balancing growth with welfare, high quality infrastructure and basic amenities, and finally a minimal measure of social security in old age and for indigent circumstances, but in a manner that is sustainable and affordable, and that is not inimical to long-term growth. And each of these, some elements are already being taken care of in the country. Some elements are wholly ignored. Some elements we're actually going counter to that. So wherever they're running counter to that or wholly ignored, FDR looks at the studies deeply, raises voice, and systematically pursues it to achieve the goals in a very strategic manner. We are reasonably good at it. We accomplished many more goals than most other non-profit organizations in India. But the task is so big, our work is minuscule compared to what needs to be done. So we are completely alive to that, very mindful of that. So in the kingdom of the blind, one-eyed man is the king. So when not much is being done, what we do appears to be very big. I'm very, very conscious of that. A lot more remains to be done, but I'm optimistic. And right now, I believe economic growth, balancing in a very poor and diverse society, balancing welfare with growth impulse, and making all Indians partners in that growth through skill promotion and enhancement of productivity through healthcare, and creating basic conditions of rule of law and decentralized development, etc., to sustain that growth. These are the immediate priorities, because next 10-15 years it looks like if the growth opportunity is missed, then India will pay a very heavy price. And if we solve that problem, many more avenues open up. So we're very strategic in our direction. We don't view all goals as equally important at a point of time. The context determines what is to be pursued at a point of time, because we have no power to change the context. We have the power to utilize the context effectively.
It's good to know, sir. And one last personal question. When is your memoir coming out?
Yes, one of the things long overdue. I've been threatening to write something. It's not a memoir. But what we've learned, I think there's something important we have to communicate in a rational, evidence-based, optimistic, and pragmatic way. It's all there in the mind. Let me come out on a limb and say, let's say by end of this year, we'll come up with a workable draft, maybe a few weeks of improvement, and by next year, early next year, we should be able to publish it. Let's hope that I'll be able to stick to this deadline.
It's wonderful to hear, but you're saying that's on behalf of the organization. It's not your personal memoir reflecting on your life. And
It's both. You see, now my life is indistinguishable from the organization indistinguishable from me. So I don't view myself as separate as an entity, as an individual. And I believe whatever we are doing is a collective work. It's not anybody's private property. Maybe I'm privileged to be able to encourage some people and to give them a sense of direction. But I learn a great deal from the young people who surround me every day and the larger society across.
It's good to know. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. JP. I
My
feel
pleasure.
a lot humble, optimistic, and happy to talk to you today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you,
very
Shiva.
much.
Wish you all the best.